What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to this channel where today I would like to speak to you from New York City about the importance of reading in regards to learning languages. Right now I'm here in New York City and I have Transformate e Vive en Equilibrio. It's hard to read that backwards in the camera lens finder thing, but I've got this book and it's basically a self-help book, but the main thing for me is that it's in Spanish and it's however many pages. It is 350 odd pages of Spanish for me to read, comprehensible Spanish as well at that, Spanish that I can actually understand, and it's so useful being able to read in the language you're trying to learn and being able to understand what you're reading. For me, a lot of my reading in my languages that I do is through an app called Link. Link is just a really good app in general. It's basically where you can read, you can listen as well. Listening while reading is also another really good thing to do. But especially with Spanish, for me, I don't really need Link all that much. I use Link still in Spanish, but I can read Spanish more or less in paper form and still understand enough of the gist where it doesn't need to be on Link or whatever for me to translate every single word. I can understand words now in Spanish through context and that kind of thing. And when you can read at a level like that where you can just read pages upon pages of the language you're trying to learn and you can understand basically the gist of what you're being told, you don't need to necessarily understand every single word, but just the gist of what you're being told, then so many things are happening in your brain, so many connections are being made right there, that whenever you see a word for the first time, it's a new word for your brain to comprehend. You see it for the second time, you're like, I think maybe I recognize that word, not quite sure, maybe I have, maybe I haven't. And then the third time you see it, you're more familiar with it, and you keep going until eventually you remember that word and you see it around other words which help you to understand the meaning. In essence, what I'm describing is the frequency illusion. The frequency illusion is probably something that you've all experienced before in some way or another. It's when you see something or hear something for the first time. Quite typically for me, it's when I read a word that I've never seen before. Could be someone's name, could just be like a synonym of a word you already know. And this is a word that you've never ever seen in your life before. It's a brand new, completely new word, or could even be a thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be language, but in this case we'll stick to language. Brand new word you've never seen before. And then within 24 hours or even a shorter period of time, you see that word again in a completely different context, outside the realm of wherever you saw it previously, and maybe you see it for a third time or a fourth time and you're like, why am I seeing this word so many times now? And basically what it is that you never noticed this word before because you didn't know what it was and you never paid it much attention, whereas now that you actually notice this word and you see it and you're like, oh okay, so this is how it's pronounced, and maybe you looked up the meaning of the word and then you see it elsewhere, you're like, wait a minute, I recognize this word from over here. That's basically frequency illusion, just when you see something for the first time and then you see it all of a sudden everywhere. And that's the same sort of thing that can happen when you're reading in another language. You see a word and you're like, I've never seen it before, but all of a sudden you start seeing it more and more and more. The more times you see a word, the more you think, I'm very interested as to what this word now means because I've seen it so many times. Then you start looking up these words, and then before you know it, you start to acquire more words and more vocabulary. Only through reading a lot will this actually happen. Only through reading a lot will you start to develop this habit of noticing words, noticing different patterns, noticing maybe different prefixes and different suffixes, where words may have bits added on to the front or the end in order to change the meaning of the word in one way or another. Quite a lot of Slavic languages do this, for example, or even, in fact, Romance languages do this all the time as well. It's just something that happens in most languages, I guess, now I think about it. Being able to see a different word and identify it and realize either you've never seen it before or realize I've seen this before, can't remember what it means, or even I've seen this word before, but now it's got a slightly different adjustment to the word as to what I see before. Anything like this, that you see a word and you notice, it all helps. And through reading, this is just something that happens naturally. A lot of people always speak about learning the top however many words. Reading is naturally a way to acquire a lot of these top, very well used words, because obviously if they're well used, they're used a lot in literature, they're used a lot in books that you may read or articles that you may read, or even podcasts that you may listen to and that kind of thing. Again, in my book here, and in basically any Spanish text you'll ever pick up, you're gonna get a lot of words, like the small words like que, like N, like E, a C, and then you're going to get like these 2-word phrases like así que, Polo de más. And there's so many different 2 and 3 and 4-word phrases in Spanish, which in English may only be a 1-word thing or maybe a 2-word thing. And you just pick up and you go to any page, and all of a sudden you see all of these kind of little letters or little words even that maybe before you're trying to learn out of context. And so it's trying to learn how to understand these words out of context. You try and learn Spanish, and then you come across the word que, and you're like, que, okay, it means what? But it also means all these other things as well. It's not an easy word to learn, and I can't even say that I fully understand the word myself. Que is not an easy word to learn for Spanish learners. Most languages will have these sort of little words which are like difficult to learn, as is certain words which maybe have 2 different forms or 3 different forms, like you got tu and tu, se and se. There's so many others that have different, the only difference is like the accent marker. And again, through reading, it helps a lot knowing when they're used, which particular words are used in particular forms. And a lot of the time, like, language is just basically noticing patterns and then being able to like decipher them. And so a lot of the time, like, people speak in different set phrases or patterns or that kind of thing. So in English, for example, you would have words like for example, or you'd have at the moment, or can't be bothered, things like that. And if you really stop and think about how you speak, even in your own language, you realize that we speak in such a set, short amount of words and phrases, and like the way that we speak, basically we just use like such a tiny amount of vocabulary, and within that as well, set phrases, just because that's what we're used to and that's what we use and we know how to use them correctly. It's very rare actually for people just to pick up a whole bunch of vocabulary at once and use them all at once. Typically, in my experience, when people change their language over time to use new words and new slang words and that kind of thing, you introduce one, then you introduce another, and it's like a slow going thing, because you learn maybe one word in context when you're speaking with your friends, and then you just throw in a new slang word or term and you've never heard it before. You hear someone else say it in a different context, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, so this word must mean this then, and then you try it yourself, and then before you know it, your speech slowly starts to change if you wanted to change it in that direction. But if you take note of how we speak, we only speak with set words, set phrases, and a very short amount of words, when really in our heads we know so many more words than we would use in daily conversation. Again, if you were to read a lot of books and over time just come across more words, even if you don't know what the words mean, if you come across them enough times, you'll at least be able to recognize the words, and that's one step closer into actually know what that word means. It makes understanding a word so much easier than trying to learn how to spell it and trying to learn how it's like the form of the word and everything else like that, as well as the meaning, if you can't even remember and recall the word itself. But if you read a lot and you come across certain words all the time, like sacapuntas, then you're like, oh, that means sharpener. Okay, cool. And then you're like, oh, how do I say that word? I can't remember how to say sharpener in Spanish. But if you come across the word sacapuntas so many times, then it's just going to come to your head because you remember, I've seen it in this context and in this context and in this book and in that article and whatever the case may be. You remember these words so much easier because you can draw pathways essentially from all these different places, and it's not just one individual solitary word in your head from a list of all these other words that you're trying to learn. You're learning it in context, which means you learn it typically with words around it, already with the correct grammar, if you're reading in a proper book, that is. And you're also learning it typically with like a story behind it. The story could be true, like I've got here, I guess true, self-help kind of thing, or it could be a legitimate made-up story, doesn't matter. But as soon as you have meaning and you understand what's being read, then you're going to remember things so much more. Then you're going to be able to recall those things so much easier in conversation. In order to learn through this method of obviously reading a lot, you do need to read a lot. I couldn't quantify how much a lot is right now because I'm still going through the journey myself with different languages. But I certainly know for 100% fact that this does work, just reading a lot and being able to pick up on words, because it's how I've been learning Polish almost exclusively through reading and listening since I started learning Polish almost 2 years ago. So I know that it works. I know, at least at the very least, that doing this and reading a lot in the language you're trying to learn, you'll at least be able to identify words and feel more comfortable with the words, and you won't see them and think, oh my god, that they just seem so massive, and like it just blows your mind. Especially with a language like Polish, for example, or if you're learning Russian, or if you're learning Japanese, those kind of languages have long words, okay? And it can be really daunting trying to look at a Polish word, for example, which is like massive long, and you're just like, how do I pronounce this? It's so difficult. I can't break it up in my head. It's just way too long for me. But the more times you see it, the easier it gets, until you get to a point of where you're like, this is how I break it up. It's actually just broken up into 4 different parts or 5 different parts, which makes it a lot easier. Oh, okay, so if you take off the first 2 letters, it's actually this word that I already know. And then, you start to deconstruct these words, and then it gets to a point where you're so comfortable with it that it's not even a challenge for you anymore, or at least it's not as much of a challenge for you before. But unless you expose yourself to all of these words, regardless of whether you know them or not, you're never going to improve. And eventually you want to get to a point of where you can read and at least understand part of what you're reading, and you want to try and improve upon that and get more comprehensible input every time you read. You want to just try and get the percentage of comprehensible input of the material that you're reading every time. So I can tell you, maybe I'm at like a 90% or so comprehensible understanding of this particular Spanish book. So there's still the 10% of unknown words in this book, or 10% of like just unknown part of the book. But I can get the general gist of it, and when I read a chapter, I know roughly what it's trying to tell me in regards to, trans fats are bad for you, and whatever else it may be telling me. I understand the concept, I understand the message it's telling me, and that's the most important thing. And you want to try and build up to that level. And I have found that trying to do this in Polish was a lot easier than trying to do it in Japanese. With Japanese, it is causing me so much issues right now in regards to trying to read in Japanese, in regards to trying to understand Japanese. It's difficult. Japanese especially, because Japanese just doesn't have spaces in between words in the language. Like if you're reading in a book, it is just no spaces. It's just symbols and symbols and symbols. Or should I say characters. So in Japanese, I'm struggling so much with this, and still after 1 year of learning Japanese, it's still so much of a struggle for me. But it's something that eventually I'll get there with, and through enough reading and with listening as well, but focus more on the reading side of it for now. The reading really helps a lot. I noticed when I first started reading in my different languages that within only like a few days to a week, I started dreaming in Spanish, and I had dreams in Polish, and I was able to dream in French, which I only started like a week and a little bit ago. Like I only started French like 8 or 9 days ago, and I'm already able to have dreams in this language. It's not something that I can just turn on and off. Obviously it's random. I don't know when I'm gonna have them. But typically if I'm reading late at night and I'm reading a lot and that's all my brain can think about, I put the book down or my phone or whatever I'm reading on, and then I go straight to sleep. That's all my brain is still thinking about, is that French language that I've just been exposed to for the last like hour or so. And most probably I'm going to be dreaming in that language because that's the last thing my brain was exposed to. It helps in that respect as well. I don't know if dreaming in another language actually helps you or not, but it's certainly a step in the right direction in regards to your brain must be picking this language up. And for me to be able to dream in French or in Japanese when I've done so before is such a cool experience. And yeah, again, it's like a confirmation that, oh yeah, you're heading in the right direction if you're dreaming in this language or subconsciously thinking in the language. So all of that is through reading, and in my opinion, it is one of the best ways to learn a language. It's not for everyone, probably not. I don't know, some people probably learn better through watching movies, but I would recommend, if you're going to do that, because it's more interesting to watch a movie than it is just to read a paper book. At minimum, just have like your subtitles on. Try and find ways to incorporate reading to some degree, because even if I'm just listening to a podcast or something, listening on its own is a lot harder than listening and then reading to what they're saying. It's so much easier to know what they're saying when you're reading along to it, and then maybe listen again without the text. You know, there's different things you can do. It doesn't have to be a paper book. It doesn't have to be link that I've necessarily suggested or whatever. it can be any form of reading. You just have to see the language written down, and you have to try your best to understand what's written down in order to progress, in my opinion, and also in order to learn new words. Yeah, that's basically it. It's a powerful thing to do. It's a very powerful tool, in my opinion, to be able to read. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. The audio is not that great. I apologize. The lighting isn't great either. I don't really know. Obviously, I'm in my hotel room in New York City right now, so I'm down to basic setups right here. I'm doing my best right now just to keep content on the move. So let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. Please let me know if there's anything that maybe I missed out, or maybe, I don't know, that you would have added to the video, or maybe that you disagreed with or agreed with. I'd like to see your comments. I'd like to see what you think. I'm more than happy to reply to your comments, and we can chat in the comment section below. Go ahead and follow me on Instagram. It's in the description down below. Nothing language learning related, but it's just whatever I decide to post on there. And yeah, with all out of the way, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this helped you in some way, one way or another. And I will catch up with you guys in the next video for another language learning related video. Until then, enjoy yourselves and have a good one. Peace out.